Good morning and welcome back to my channel. I am Ken McAuliffe, the jazz vinyl audiophile. I'm a card-carrying member of the North American Audiophile Association. 3 times a year we have our meetings somewhere in a cave in northern Ontario. Yes, it is a man cave where all the men assembled wearing their fur pelts that we've gathered on our audiophile hunting missions to establish our creed and recite our allegiance to the audiophile way of life. Today's video will be in 2 parts. Part 1, in response to Randy, the audio cheapskate, and his video, why audiophiles are full of crap. So you could say this video is why audiophiles aren't full of crap, and then I'm going to give you 8 reasons why audiophiles are not full of crap, and why audiophiles are actually highly advanced beings in the pursuit of truth and beauty in music. If you will, join me as I take apart Randy's screed, his rant on why audiophiles are full of crap, much of which I believe is dated information not applicable to the current lifestyle of your average audiophile, be he a poor, money-scrubbing, hugging dude or a wealthy person who can afford to buy what Michael Fremer reviews. A. Randy said that audiophiles say that recording's not audiophile approved, so it's no good for me. You know, back in the 90s, you would go to hi-fi shows and they would have a room full of all the audiophile approved records. Well, now audiophile approved is kind of a useless phrase because, folks, what you're buying in the shape of a craft recording, a tone poet, a classic vinyl, and analog productions, or any number of new companies that have sprouted up, ERC, who cut vinyl from the original tapes, that is an audiophile approved recording. So all your tone poets from Blue Note, all the things I just mentioned, those are all audiophile approved recordings. I think Randy is referring to back in the days where only AudioQuest made audiophile recordings, or even that crap, like, remember that record Boom, Bang, Boom, and Harp? I mean, what a horrible piece of music that is. I think it was on an RCA Living Stereo. It was all just ridiculous, jokey percussion things. That's crap audiophile approved music. So I see where Randy's coming from in that regard, but it doesn't really make any sense in today's high-res cut from the original master tape vinyl that most people seem to love, especially in my jazz vinyl group. Number 2, Randy says that audiophiles look down their nose and say, well, that system is no good. It's not playback as the artist intended. Me and my audiophile buddies never sit around and say that. That system doesn't play back as intended. At the end of this video, I'm going to rattle off a bunch of components that are relatively inexpensive that you can assemble to create a high-end audio rig. I think you can have a high-end audio system for about $1,000. And if you're not willing to invest some money, some cold, hard, green dinero in your hi-fi system, then I don't know what to tell you. Because for me, being an audiophile, it really is about the pursuit of truth and beauty in music. I want to be in the recording studio with John Paul, George, and Ringo. I want to be in the studio with Rudy Van Gelder and all those genius cats, or Steely Dan, those guys, or Edie Gourmet. You know, I want to be in the studio with Frank Sinatra. That wonder, the concert Sinatra. You've seen that record? I want to be in the studio while they're making that record, man. That's the ultimate idea. You know, in the 70s, I worked in recording studios very briefly. Making demos, and I cut some commercials, and you know, that's a special thing when you're in the studio. You're trying to document a moment in time that will be there forever. You want it to be as high-res, dedicated, as perfect as possible, and that's where I want to be. I want to be in the studio when this guy's Pat Metheny, Kenny Burrell, Elvin Jones are at the top of their art form, applying everything they know in that moment. That's what being an audiophile is about to me. I want to get as close to the music as possible. So the whole idea that playback as the artist intended. You know, very often the artist doesn't care about the playback. The great majority of musicians are not audiophiles. I don't even know if half of them, even back in the 60s and 70s and 50s, attended the mastering sessions. I don't know. So that one, I don't know. Randy's other accusation that audiophiles say that speaker could only sound good in a high-end system. No matter what system you have, your system has to have synergy. You can't just throw any system together and expect it to sound good. You want everything to work together. You don't want to put something in the system that has no sense being in the system. I wouldn't put a Tech DOS turntable that Fremer reviewed with a shit amplifier and a pair of Klipsch RP 600M speakers. even though it would sound friggin' incredible, or the idea that your system has to be at a certain level to hear a certain thing. There is some truth to that. The better system you have, not only will you get more detail, I think young audiophiles think, I want to get as much detail as possible. For me, that's not really what it's about. It's not about that. My Shindo amplification, which is definitely Audiophile approved, is not the last word in transparency or resolution or detail, but it has the kind of tone and texture that I've never heard from any other component. That's what I want to hear. Flesh and blood, tone and texture, like the guy sitting next to me with his guitar. That's what I want to hear, not the last degree of detail. I've heard, remember Karma speakers? I did a story for Blender magazine years ago where we interviewed all different strata of audiophiles. I interviewed this wonderful lady who's since passed named Marjorie, who had quad speakers, and I think she might have had a Gerard 301 turntable. She collected vacuum coffee pots, which I'd never seen before, and she could speak very intelligently. She was an intelligent female audiophile. I also interviewed some guy who had Mark Levinson amps and Karma speakers. That system took my head off. So bright and sterile. That's what I avoid in hi-fi. You want to hear flesh and blood, warmth, tone, texture. If there's great treble, I want to hear that. If there's bass extension, I want to hear that. Randy also said most audiophiles say high-end starts at X amount. I'll put that to rest at the end of this video. But Randy also said some things that are absolutely true. And I think, lambasting the kind of audiophiles who are just about money, who are listening to the gear and not the hi-fi, who are stuck on the audiophile nervosa train, thinking they always have to, who are never satisfied. I have a friend like that. He's always the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. Just sit back, enjoy your music. Don't buy anything. Don't buy anything, man. Just stick with what you got and enjoy. There's a million tweaks you can do. You can put different platforms under your cartridges. Under your gear. You can try different cables. Cables can get crazy expensive, but there's also the cable company where you can check out everything used. So there are many paths to being a audiophile. He also said that in his comment that speakers should only be used in a high-end system, that audiophiles say that. Well, that's I don't think we ever say that. Whenever I review a piece of gear, I have a bunch of amplifiers on hand. I try to compare the piece of gear with many different things to see how they sound with each piece. Steve Guttenberg does this. Sean at Zero Fidelity does this. People at Absolute Sound do this. You want to compare it to see how it fits with other gear. You don't just make a blanket accusation. So anyway, I really enjoyed Randy's video. It inspired me to do this video. Let's talk about the 8 reasons in praise of audiophiles. Number 1, it doesn't have to be insane prices. As I will spell out at the end of this video, we get audio, lambasted. If somebody came to see my system, they think I'm nuts. But once you play the music, they know I'm not nuts, because it's about music. To me, being an audiophile is really just about loving music, and as I said, I want to get as close to the performance in the studio as possible. That's what I want to hear. 2, it is, getting all the detail you can get, but it's more than that. I used to have a girlfriend who would say, "Oh, it's so much detail. You can hear every little thing." Yeah, isn't that what you want to hear? Isn't that why you're buying the record? Whether it's the Bee Gees or Gloria Gaynor or Britney Spears or FKA Twigs. I want to be in the studio, as I said. Number 3, audiophiles respect tradition. This is another reason in praise of audiophiles. In the 70s you had solid state amplifiers with tons of watts and inefficient speakers. But that whole time, and in the 80s, that whole time there was a cult, a Japanese clique where they adhered to low watt, flea tube, single-ended triode amplifiers and horn speakers. Well, now tube amplifiers and SETs and horn speakers are big all over the world, because just as they did with vinyl, Japanese held on to the idea of this is the art form, this is the way to go. Solid state can sound great. I just reviewed a Class D, wasn't a Class D, I just reviewed a switching amplifier by Techniques that digitized everything, and it sounded friggin' amazing. My point being, the Japanese held on to that idea that was popular beginning in the 1930s in movie theaters. We had a tube amplifier and giant horn speakers behind a screen, because you need to project that music and that dialogue to the back of the auditorium, and they didn't have lots of power. They only had a little bit of wattage to the tube amps, so they had to make high efficiency speakers. Well, that's a sound I still love. I love all the Volti audio speakers. I don't love all the clip speakers, even though the Forte 4 is an amazing speaker that I recently reviewed. Audiophiles held on to that. There are more tube amplifiers being made now than any time in history. And you can search out, there's a whole vintage thing going on now. My next door neighbor is way into vintage. He resuscitates, renovates, resurges, what's the word? Tube amplifiers, and brings out all their beauty and sound. And that's a whole nother cult. But they're audiophiles, they're into vintage. A bunch of musicians are into vintage, so audiophiles have a respect for what's come before, and they pay for it. Number 4, audiophiles support small business. PS Audio, Shit, Rega, Project, Rogue, NAD, Outlaw Audio, Grado, Samico, Hanna. These are all essentially small businesses run by a few people with a high level of expertise. And audiophiles in that way are anti-corporate America, anti the gravy train of endless updates. They appreciate what a small businessman with a lot of talent can do. All of my gear is built by small businessmen. DeVore Fidelity speakers made out in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. My air integrated amp made in Colorado. My Parasound amp, things made in Minnesota. LKV Research Class D amplifier made in New Hampshire, I believe. Kuzma turntable made in the Czech Republic, I believe. This turntable I'm reviewing right now, the Carbon Debut Pro, is it made in the Czech Republic? I should know that. My Shindo gear, of course, made in Tokyo, or made in Japan. My Spender BC1 speakers, which you can get a good pair for $300, which will rival any speaker you can buy today, I believe. I love the Spender BC1. It's a large footprint, 6-inch woofer, just sounds great with any amplifier. Audiophiles support small business in a world dominated by corporations. I hate that. And even with high-end, well, number 5, there is extremely expensive gear made by some of these manufacturers, but very often it trickles down to their budget level. Project makes very expensive tables. They make budget level tables, as does Rega, for about $400 entry level. So you're getting trickle down technology. Carbon fiber tone arms are, I think, trickle down from like the space program or something. Audiophile manufacturers are the best of the best. These are smart people trying to make a living, trying to offer cutting edge design. Look at Zoo, Shit Audio and Zoo, 2 American companies doing great work, small companies that have unique products that are very popular. As I said, number 6, audiophiles are often anti-corporate. I mean, Sony and Panasonic are definitely playing in the corporate world, but they make great gear. Panasonic being Techniques. Number 7, I rail against the idea personally, and this is an old argument now. People lambaste audiophiles for spending money on gear. We spend money on watches, on clothes, on cars, on houses, on vacations. Music for me is the ultimate time machine. It takes me places nowhere else goes. Music accompanies you when you're happy, when you're sad, when it's in the background, when you're doing your chores. Music is the essence of beauty and life for me. I was a musician for many years. I collected recordings for many years. So the idea that, I won't spend any money on my playback system, that's insane. It's just, the only person you're robbing is yourself. Now the average person has so many things to take their energy and their concentration and focus. Music has gone into the background, which is a real shame, which is why I think the vinyl resurgence has occurred and continues to grow, which is really insane. I think kids who grew up on MP3s suddenly hear a vinyl record and they're kind of shocked by what they're hearing. They're hearing an analog signal, a human signal, and they hear a record in all its beauty and joy and space, and they have an album jacket to look at. And I think on a level a lot of people don't quite understand, analog connects with you and its experience, and it makes you sit down and listen to the whole thing and the beauty of the album and what the artist was trying to conceive. Sinatra came up with, I believe, the original idea of the album concept, and then it was just taken and run with it by everybody from Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye to Miles Davis to the Beatles. So, you want to spend a little money and invest in your music. It will only reward you in spades more than you've ever invested into it. But at the end of the day, listening to music is about joy. And sometimes you have to invest a little bit of yourself to really experience that joy to the fullest potential. Okay, let's talk about a few pieces of gear that will not break the bank, that you can combine and mix and match to create a wonderful hi-fi system for not a ton of money. I took all these from the most recent edition of the Stereophile Recommended Components issue. Turntables, integrated amplifiers, phono stages, and speakers. The cheapest, the least inexpensive piece I have on here is the PhonoStage the Shit Manny for $130. The most expensive being the Shit Ragnarok at $17.99. Shit is such a wonderful company. You know, it's such a drag they couldn't continue the solid turntable, but they realized it was too hard to source all those bits and pieces for the turntable, but hopefully it'll come back at some point. Turntables. Planar 1, including a cartridge, for $525. Project Debut Carbon, including a cartridge, for $599. The Shit Soul included a cartridge and a removable tone arm for $800. Integrated amplifiers. PS Audio Express, $700. NAD 328, $600. Shit Ragnarok, $17.99, including a DAC and a PhonoStage. And the Rogue Audio Sphinx, $15.95. PhonoStage stages. Shit Manny for $130. Sculpture A Mini Nano Step Up, which I have here, which is an amazing piece of kit for $750. Lage Audio LCR and Coppola PhonoStages for $340 and $310. And then when it comes to speakers, you just have endless varieties of speakers you can get. And here in New York, you know, we have, going back to the vintage things, there's a place out in Brooklyn called Mikey's Hookup. They sell all these refurbished integrated receivers and amplifiers, which are very popular with young folk getting into vinyl. But even with new speakers, we have the Audio Engine A2 for $250 a pair. Wharfdale Diamond 11.2, $500 a pair. Those are wonderful speakers with a velvety mid-range, a crystalline treble, not a lot of bass, but a wonderful speaker. PSB Alpha P5, $449 a pair. You want to get into electrostatics, Magnapen LRS for $650. Another speaker I reviewed, the Fine Audio F301 425, a Scottish-made speaker that had a nice toasty top end and a clear mid-range. I like that speaker a lot. The JBL Stage A170, $600 a pair. Klipsch RPM 600M, $700 a pair. And I really believe that those speakers have to be used with a tube amp to really get the best sound out of them. You know, if you spend a little money, you can get a great tube amp integrated from Prima Luna. And finally, the Vanitude Transparent 1 for $600. You can mix and match these components. My point is that you don't have to spend gobs of money, insane amounts of money, to put together a really good hi-fi system that will bring joy to you and your family for years to come. Thanks a lot for watching this video, and have a great week. Bye.